This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Winderman there, Clay Ferraro here. We got a lot to talk about today, and I do like what O was saying before we started here. That so much of this Miami Heat season to this point, you can point to the development program, and this is who they've been forever. And I like that you use the word resiliency and perseverance, and yet at the same time, I also think that what you're seeing with this Miami Heat team is how so many leagues, or how so all these leagues right now are viewing COVID-19, and then how the league is viewing it versus how the teams have to approach it. And what the Miami Heat are doing right now, and you saw it last night, and you're seeing it in the last few days with some of these guys who are out there, they're viewing it as, however we are being asked to play through this, we need to find the best edge that we can.
Yes.
And the Heat are finding a way to do that right now. So we're going to talk about that as the show goes on. We're going to talk about the upcoming schedule. But Ira, before we get into this, I just wanted to look at the game last night and what your main takeaways were outside of what we've talked about, right? And some of the things that the developmental players and KZ Okpala and Max Strus, and you can look at their numbers, but there were a couple of things that really stood out to me, but I wanted to kind of give you the floor up front. Your main takeaway from last night's game was what?
That you still have to give a crap no matter what's going on, and either you care or you don't care. You talk to NBA coaches and they tell you there are two most dangerous parts of the season. One is the holiday season. You have people in your house, maybe not in COVID as much, who's not there. You're out of your routine. You can let go of the rope a little. The Utah Jazz are famous for always scheduling a road trip leading to Christmas. They believe that being at home just is too problematic and it gets in the way of your thinking.
That's interesting. I never heard that. That's really interesting.
So they do it that way. So that's a real concern, that this is the time of year you can kind of let go of things. The other thing is it's the midseason malaise that Shaq talks about. From the midpoint of your season till the All-Star break, it's like you're sort of getting ready for the second half of the season. You've lost some of your excitement from the start of the season, and there's a little doldrums in the middle there. And the one thing about the Heat and the way they've done it is because every game is sort of a mission to them, that there's a conquest, and that they have to live in the moment. I think they're able to push past that a little bit more. And I think my takeaway, even from last night, is you can see Erik Spoelstra almost coaching each of these recent games as mini playoff games. As, okay, who do I have available? What does the other team do best? How do I take care of this challenge? A lot of teams don't do that. A lot of teams say, we'll just play our game. Last night, the Indiana Pacers said, we're just going to play our game. Well, their game was not suited to play against the zone. So if they really would have taken that game as an individual challenge, the Pacers would have said to themselves, okay, how are we going to crack the Heat zone? What sets are we going to use? What's going to work? What's not going to work? They didn't. They just played a game. And when you play a game against a team that actually gives a rat's butt, you see the pounding that they wound up taking. I really think Rick Carlisle has lost that team. I really think that his sort of way of doing things just isn't working in Indiana. I know they gave him a new contract. They're not a big revenue team. They might be stuck with that contract, but that's one takeaway I had last night. And I think there's the other thing is, I honestly believe that if you were to go to Sawgrass Mills Mall today amid all the chaos from COVID and shopping and everything, and just grab 5 random people, which probably is not legal, put them in a van and drive them down to FTX Arena, Erik Spoelstra would craft a game plan that how he could take care of Jesus and George and Alan and Bill and Bob and somehow get an offense and a defense to work. I really think there was something that showed the genius of Erik Spoelstra last night. I mean, you're talking about a starting lineup with Max Strus, a rotation with KZ Okpala and Omar Yurtseven. Apparently, the Heat have a player named Marcus Garrett, which is good to know. And yet he goes in and plays good minutes also. I mean, it really is fascinating what he was able to do. But if you care, if you give a crap, or another word, if you want to use it there, that's what makes a difference. My takeaway from last night was the Heat played to, I guess Jim Mora here, to win, Herm Edwards, to win the game. I think the Pacers played, let's just get to the Christmas break and get the hell out of here.
I'm dying here because I'm reading the chat. Scummy says Clay looks like that dude that does the house makeovers. I'll take that.
Yeah, you
I'll
know
take
what?
that. I'm
I think
laughing.
this. I think if we get you tatted
I
up
have
between the second and the third show here or whatever, I think we can pull that off. Yeah,
I have no
I think
house
you're more of the
makeovers.
lottery home guy. Yeah.
Yeah, I have no house makeover skills, by the way. But please feel free to drop your questions, your comments in the chat. We'll get to them. And also, please, please, please smash that like button,
And Clay,
like
by the way,
button.
you're in Cleveland now. I was there last Monday. Baker Mayfield did give me the keys to the stadium because I was right across the street. So if you get a chance and you can just take the laundry out and put it in the washer, I'm sure Baker and his wife will appreciate it so they can sleep in tonight.
Baker may need keys to a different stadium at some point here soon because I'm not sure he's going to last here much longer. But yeah, please drop your questions in the chat right there. I think you mentioned Rick Carlisle. That's a big part of it. The other one, Ira, is all these guys are on the trade block. I mean, you read these reports about coming out of Indiana. I mean, they basically opened up their roster to anybody in the NBA. So the main takeaway I had, and this kind of piggybacks off of what we've been saying, but if you put those rosters side by side, the Indiana Pacers and the Miami, you got all-stars on that Pacers team. You've got all-star caliber players who may not have made the all-star team yet, but Domantas Sabonis, Miles Turner, Malcolm Brogdon, I believe he got hurt last night. Karis LeVert. I mean, you've got players on that team, any of whom
they should be better.
Yes, but it's a combination of give a crap. It's a combination of, I think, those guys. You mentioned the Rick Carlisle situation, but it's also, man, you got to put the spotlight on the Heat and what Eric Spoelstra has been able to do and getting those guys out there. And look, when you're putting a lineup out there and a group of guys that frankly probably shouldn't be playing NBA basketball right now, you're going to have games like you do in Detroit the other night. You're going to have games where it just doesn't happen.
Talent rises to its level or falls to its level. You made one other really good point as you wake up here also, Clay, about the trades. And think about this. I mean, even a guy like you can get into the inner sanctum of FTX Arena because Will has the secret code there and the thumbprint, so you could snoop around. But when it comes to Heat trades, they just happen, and you don't know until you know. In other words, your point is great. Miles Turner knows he's on the trade block. Domantas Sabonis knows he's on the trade block. Karis LeVert knows he's on the trade block. Think what happened at last season's NBA trade deadline. Wait, Kelly Olynyk was traded?
Yeah.
No one saw that coming. Yeah. And then boom, all of a sudden he's out the door. So what happens? Until then, Kelly's playing his best for the Heat because he thought he was going to be a Heat for life. And then it's like, Kelly, you got to get that suitcase packed. And by the way, your thumbprint no longer works in the door. And you're sort of out of there. That's the difference in organizations also. Look, Clay, I know you to a degree, me to a greater degree. I hate the lack of information sometimes we get out of the Heat. It's such a closed society. We talk about it all the time. Woj and Shams might get all their leaks from other places. Very rarely do you see the phrase sources say the Miami Heat ... You just don't get that. That's the difference with what's going on in Indiana now also. Look, for all we know, the Heat might be planning to trade 3 or 4 of their players. And maybe by February 10th, we come back and do our Christmas deadline special, 5 straight hours here on the Big O Show. I don't think that Clay's bosses at Channel 10 know that right now. So when we do that show, all of a sudden you'll see that other guys are involved. That's the difference. And then you just continue to play because you have no other motivation. You're not calling your realtor. You're not trying to figure out how to move your cars in the transporter. The Pacers, there's a reason some teams are craptastic organizations and others are consistent winners. Last night was a really good example.
Scummy brings up a good question, and maybe we'll spend part of the
next. How do you say that with a straight face? How do you say with a straight face, Scummy brings up a good question? Like,
I mean, look, when you just because the name is Scummy, I think you can at least concede that when you have 2 idiots like you and me on this show, that even somebody named Scummy can bring some class to the program.
The scary thing is, I'm not sure you're reading just a screen name someone had, or if 2 parents literally, the kid is born, they're in the birthing room right there, and they're going, yeah, I like Steve or Scummy. What do you think? Which way are you going to go on that? But God bless you, Scummy.
Hey, look, I've been in the delivery room for 3 of them. If the wife, after what she's just been through, and who knows what drugs she had to take in order to get
Scummy,
but if she because of the epidural / whatever it takes, maybe in a little bit of an altered, if she chooses Scummy, then it's the husband.
Anyway,
you are letting Scummy go.
Go ahead, lead us on.
So he said, which teams in the Eastern Conference would be a potential bad matchup for the Heat in the playoffs? And then potentially in the Western Conference, if you make it to the NBA Finals, who else would be a bad matchup potentially in the NBA Finals? So that's a good topic for coming up in the next segment. I kind of like that. But real quickly, as far as last night's game goes, something I'm noticing that I think could really serve this team well, in addition to what you're saying about some of these other guys that are getting playing time that you're having to develop. Duncan Robinson, it's not just that he's hitting the shots for it's not just that he's starting to find his stroke a little bit. He is attacking the basket in a much different way, and not necessarily driving inside and getting the layup like we saw after he missed the three and Omer Yurtseven had that great pass, the great cut. But he's getting a mid-range game. He's figuring out, and so Ira, the thing that teams have done against him to kind of counteract him is they're just being extremely aggressive with him at the line, right? And they're knocking him off of his spots. Every NBA player has a number of spots, and you'll see sometimes, you'll see sometimes a guy, like, he'll take a dribble and a hop, and you're like, why is he going to that place as opposed to trying to get 2 feet closer? Well, it's because in practice they work at certain spots to where they get the stroke there. So to them, it's easier, and there's better muscle memory going 2 feet back into the left than it is trying to get a little bit closer, right? With Duncan Robinson, teams have kind of figured out his spots. And so they're aggressively attacking to push him off of those spots. But Ira, what I noticed last night and what I've seen from him a little bit in other games, but also especially last night, is he's anticipating teams jumping out and forcing him off of those spots. And so he's getting really comfortable now, taking a couple of dribbles. Like, he's figuring out, okay, it's not against the rules to dribble the basketball. He's getting really comfortable. And then not just going to the basket, but also stopping and taking a mid-range. There are certain things about him, like, he can shoot, but he hadn't fully taken advantage of the fact that he can shoot from anywhere on the floor, including in that mid-range game, until recently. And Ira, it's something you talk about all the time. You're on the scouting report. And what is on that scouting report? And right now with Duncan, it's okay, well, make sure he doesn't get to his spot at the three-point line. Now the scouting report may have to change a little bit. And that'll in turn open up things for other guys, but also it makes it a little bit easier, gives you a little bit more space at that three-point line if teams have to account for you going inside.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm impressed with your analytics. I'm just wondering if it's not a little over the top where you sit the girls there and say you each have to find one sweet spot for Duncan Robinson and no dinner. But Clay, how you want to parent, that's up to you, so I'll leave that be. But that's a point well made. And the thing is, again, and Clay, this is something I've gotten asked in my Ask Ira at SunSentinel.com and other people about Duncan, and you shouldn't start him and you should start Strus again. Look at the opening defensive matchups in so many of these games. When you go into a game, you say the opposition has perimeter defender A, their prime defensive guy. I can't tell you how many times that guy has been assigned to Duncan Robinson, where the other team feels as if you cut off the head of the snake and you take away that three-point game, everything else stops flowing. I mean, look, we saw last night, 22 threes, tied the franchise record. That's the Heat's sort of juice. That's what gets them going. That's their power supply. So teams are doing that. So again, the struggles for Duncan are also a product of ultimate respect. The Heat respected Duncan by giving him 5 years, $90 million. Other teams have taken similar notice that he's a player of that value. Whether he's hitting or not hitting, as long as he occupies the other team's best defender, when Jimmy comes back, when Kyle is on the floor, he's making their lives easier. There is no metric for that, except in the Ferraro house, where they chronicle these kind of things. And to me, that's a big part of this also. If at any point Duncan loses his respect, then it goes south. Then it all changes. Then all of a sudden, when you see him with the weakest defender on him, when the Lakers come in and Isaiah Thomas is guarding him or someone like that, that's when you say you have a problem. But the fact that his reputation still carries that weight, that even in a game like yesterday, where Max Strus might be hitting more threes or Tyler Hero, the concern still is about Duncan Robinson. So he's still meeting at least part of his mandate. That matters. And the fact that he's showing other offenses, you know what? This is the debate we could have forever about whether a good 2 is better than a bad 3. And you can give me all the metrics you want and points per shot and overall value. When you see the ball go through the basket, it is good for your mental well-being as a player and as a team. And if you're a team that's now moved more towards zone defense, you get to set up the zone after a made basket. So after a made 2, you're back in the zone, which crushed the Pacers last night. After a missed 3, you have that long rebound, and you're just running in the fire drill, picking up whoever you get in transition. That's why those 2-pointers by Duncan are meaningful baskets. I agree.
Excuse me real quickly, Ira. Adeline, you better get Duncan Robinson's ISO numbers. Santa is watching.
Exactly. Yes.
Santa is watching. So are we.
All right, so we know there'll be one lump of coal for at least one of the Ferraro girls. But again, I think the other metrics you've been forwarding me have been very good, so that's fine also.
Yeah, even if they also have that they want Gabby's dollhouse written in there, they meant to send that to Santa too.
You know what?
Look,
as long as Clay, when you get them the dollhouse, you draw the 3-point line somewhere, I have no issue with it.
Yeah. So look, all joking aside, it's the fascinating thing with the Heat right now. It's that you can put the talent, like if you stack talent, like if this was NBA 2K and it was strictly like overall talent level
right.
for the rosters. By the way, to feed off of that, who was favored in last night's game? The Indiana Pacers. The Pacers were favored in that game. Why wouldn't you be?
Yeah, the wise guys know. And by the way, before we go to break right now, I just want to give some people some perspective also. Is usually we're well scripted on this. But folks, today I literally am playing Clay Ferraro bingo, trying to figure which topics he's coming up with and checking off my card on the side. And I'll tell you why as we go to break here in Pallet, Rack City, inside the paint, is last night Clay to me, and we'll talk about this after the break, was such a swing game that I didn't know the tenor of today's show. If the Miami Heat would have lost last night and would be coming off consecutive losses to the Pistons and the Pacers, I think we would have had the shovels out and done some burying. The fact that they won shows for everyone who tells me all the time, Ira, you cover a sport with 82 games. It's not like the NFL with 16 or 17 or college football with 11 or 12. It's just another game. No, I think last night was really a swing game. You're starting a 4-game homestand, your longest of the season to this stage, and you're coming off a stinker of a loss to the worst team in the NBA, one that lost 14 consecutive games. So literally, Clay and I are I'm flying blind now because I didn't give him sort of the itinerary of today. But Clay, you've already checked off 3 boxes, and I might have a bingo by the next segment.
Well, and we're going to talk about some of these matchup things. C. Dallas says, beat Detroit, please. Yeah, absolutely. Hawaiian Punch, thank you as always for the nice comments. And guys, on the other side here, I do want to talk about some of these matchups coming up. But also how the NBA is approaching this virus. And you talked about this. Sure. We talked about this during the crossover. It's going to be, okay, Adam Silver has chosen to play through this, right? Whatever the cost. And the cost will happen to be bring up guys from the G League. Well, the Heat are doing a lot right now. And I'm not sure any team in the NBA is doing as much as they can to make sure that they are not the next team to have an outbreak. Absolutely. We'll talk about that and a lot more coming up on the other side right here.
More scummy coming up.
Welcome back here on Inside the Paint, the joke that gets us every time. Ira Winderman from the Sun Sentinel. Clay Ferraro here as we take you through these last 35 minutes of the program. As always, we want to keep this interactive. You guys have already made some great comments, some great questions so far. And we're going to get the one. Scummy brought up the question about matchups, which I really like, and I want to get to that coming up in a little bit. But David brings up a question, and it kind of goes back to what Big O was saying during the crossover, which is, with Jimmy and Bam out, how impactful, how beneficial can this stretch be where you're having guys who are rolling out there and getting productive minutes, but also succeeding? And as I pose this to you, Ira, it's something I want to go back to what Mario Cristobal said at his introductory news conference for the Hurricanes. And it's not that the question was about Miami swag. And actually, you know what? This was on game day. It was about this University of Miami swag. And look, it's a chicken or an egg thing. Swag doesn't lead you to success. When you go out there and you succeed and the work that you've put in leads to success, that leads to confidence, which leads to the swag. And so when you got a bunch of players out there, a Max Strus, guys who weren't drafted, Duncan Robinson after he went out there and got a big contract, and we know he's been through his issues this year, but it's when you're able to go out there and the work that you've put in leads to success on the floor, then that leads to the swag. Then that leads to the celebrating that we saw last night. We've seen by guys who, with any other team, they may not be out there dancing and celebrating, but with the Miami Heat, because they put them through the paces and they make them go out there and put in the work at specific things, then it leads to that confidence and that swag. So yeah, I do think it's going to be really impactful moving forward, but I don't know that it would work the same way with other teams because of how the Heat put these guys through it.
I'm going to sort of sit down here as a role I've taken over the years. I'm not going to deny it and play the role here for a second of contrarian Ira. I love what Gabe Vincent and Max Strus and Omar Yurtseven, to a degree, KZ Okpala, have done in recent games. They have kept the Heat in the seeding race, which is huge, as we know, Clay, because the Heat last season finished one game out of home court in the first round, would have played the Knicks or the Hawks instead of the Bucks, and our whole world might be different. I mean, we might have a fancier set if they won the championship, and you would just take it on the road with you because we'd have like the big old bus wherever we go. But they didn't. They played the Bucks in the first round. They got a crappy seed. They were swept. So let's look at the actual playoff possibilities of this team. And as much as I love what those guys have done, Clay, let's get back to our regular starting lineup. Everyone's healthy again. It will happen one day, God willing. So you're going to have Bam at center. You're going to have PJ Tucker at power forward, Jimmy at small forward, Duncan Robinson at shooting guard, and Kyle Lowry at point guard. That's your starting five. I think you and I would agree when fully healthy, you probably have Tyler Hero as sixth man, an award he very well might win. You certainly have Dwayne Dedmon as your backup center. He's been terrific during this stretch. A nice counter to Bam with his size and physicality. And the hope still is that Markieff Morris, who's only played 10 games, comes back to where he was. So I've just given you 8 players, the starters and 3 prime reserves. In the playoffs, you might only go 8 deep. Pat Riley has that saying, play 8, utilize 5, trust 3, or whatever. But let's say that's 8. So even then, Clay, I'm going to give you those 8 players. You know who's left. I'll give you the poo-poo platter of choices here. You still have Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, Omar Yurtseven, Caleb Martin, and KZ Okpala if you want to throw him in there. No offense, KZ. Who would your next man be if you're only going 9 deep? In other words, your starting lineup, Adebayo, Tucker, Robinson, Butler, Lowry. Your next 3 off the bench in any order, Hero, Dedmon, and Markieff Morris. Of what you have left, who's your 9th man?
It's a name you haven't even mentioned yet. And I don't even know that he would be the 9th man.
I know who you're going to say, if he's healthy.
Victor Oladipo.
Okay, and that's a good name. I'm not even going there, but you're right. So again, if I reshuffle, I would have him as one of my definites in the next 4.
So this, I think I'm kind of accentuating the point that you're making, which is that at this point, this is a great story and It's keeping you alive in the seeding race. But if you're going to have to rely on these players later on, it's because something else went wrong. And so I feel that. And I think that's probably a really good point. I almost feel
but honestly, Clay, so I made a mistake there and you caught me, and now I just feel terrible. But you put Victor Oladipo.
I didn't even know you made it. I didn't even know. I thought you were kind of like accentuating the point that you've got all these players.
So let's say Oladipo, Hero, Dedmon, and Morris are your next 4. You're 9 deep. What I'm trying to get to is this. I'm not so sure Max Strus plays a single playoff minute, or Gabe Vincent, or Caleb Martin, or Omar Yurtseven, or KZ Okpala because of the depth of talent. So I know it's a nice narrative now. You're getting these guys ready and they're showing they can do it. And who knows? I mean, you're going to get to this, I'm sure, now in the next couple of minutes. And maybe COVID means you have to have a shadow starting lineup available because you never know when things are going to turn. And maybe Adam Silver, as much as he's throwing anything against the wall now in the regular season with these emergency 10-day contracts, shockingly says, no, LeBron was still having the playoffs. No, Chris Paul was still having the playoffs. And you wind up seeing the G League playoffs competed on ABC at 9 p.m. nationally in June. Maybe that's the case. But I think the reality is for all the feel-good stories, of all Spoelstra's elves and what, Strus and Vincent and Yurtseven and Martin have given us, the bottom deal is we're going to ride the reindeer. We're going to ride the guys who are pulling the sleigh. Look at the Jewish guy go here. So that's the difference. That's sort of what the story still is. That's where they have to get. They have to get to a healthy Bam, a healthy Butler, a healthy Morris, hopefully a healthy Oladipo. That's going to be the mainstays.
It's funny. We were joking about Santa in the first segment. Maybe I should have brought up a Hanukkah Harry as well for all of you old John Lovett Saturday Night Live fans, which is probably just you and me, by the way, Ira. I don't think anybody's in it. No, look, I think if you have to rely on those guys for an extended period of time in the playoffs and something went wrong, right? And I think that's kind of the point here. It's either Victor Oladipo has not come back, or one of those other guys has gotten hurt, or heaven
Right.
forbid, you have a stretch of games where you have guys out because of the
Playoff
virus.
COVID, yeah.
Yeah, and so hopefully we're not even dealing with that. I do think where it helps is twofold. It's, let's say you have a bad injury happen during the playoffs, and or foul trouble, okay? And this is okay. Let's say Duncan Robinson has foul trouble, like significant foul trouble, which we know the referees can't stand him for whatever reason. So he gets
Only
3
in the
fouls.
opening minute. Only in the opening minute of games.
Right.
Does anyone get more first-minute fouls than Duncan Robinson?
No, and doesn't get any called the other way either. So let's say he gets 57 seconds, he's got 3 fouls. I think you're extremely confident that you can put Max Strus out there for the first half of a playoff game until Duncan Robinson is able to get back. And honestly, lately, you've seen some games where even Duncan Robinson doesn't have it, where Max Strus has gotten his minutes in the fourth quarter. These are meaningful games.
That's a really good point. As a matter of fact, I think Cleveland Clay Ferraro is much sharper than the one we get down here, who apparently is dulled by the sun. And the other point of that is, you remember the 2020 finals when Bam got hurt and they were forced to start Myers Leonard.
Yeah.
And it just went away against the Lakers there. So you're right, Clay. If there's that kind of Bam Adebayo injury now, at least you have a Dwayne Dedmon. And I've spoken, this going on for years at the Sun Sentinel with Big O and other radio stations about the lack of a reserve point guard. But now you have Gabe Vincent. Now if Kyle Lowry goes out, you're not even looking at the scrap heap late in the season. You're saying, hey, we have a guy who's done it. So I agree. It gives you the confidence of knowing that in your back pocket, you have more than you had to go with before, because we all remember those 2020 NBA Finals when not only did Bam Adebayo go out, but remember Goran Dragic was out. And he didn't have another answer behind Tyler Hero. So yes, I think what it does is it makes you a bit more confident that you're not just drawing from the absolute end of a no-play roster, what they're doing now. And here's the other point of it. It's letting us enjoy December. It's letting us enjoy a time of the season when it is the doldrums, and there are fun, and there is Max Strus hitting threes, and there is Gabe Vincent showing what he did when Nigeria beat the U.S. in a pre-Olympic qualifier when Gabe was playing for the Nigeria national team. You know what those guys have done? They've given us fun at a time when the NBA season, let's be honest, even without COVID, isn't always so much fun in the December doldrums.
Well, I think even more so right now. And you look at some of the lineups that these teams are having to roll out. And, the NBA basically implemented a rule forcing teams to go and sign guys off the street now. And so it kind of, we talked about this earlier, but it kind of shows the difference between how the NBA views the virus, and then you've got how the NHL is viewing the virus and how the NFL is viewing the virus. But most importantly, you've got these guys that are out there and Scummy, his current SNL, the Yankadare of comedy. I just love the Yankadare reference, man. You're taking me back. You're taking me back to when I fell in love with this sport. So I want to get back to one of his earlier questions, though, Ira, and it's about matchups in the Eastern Conference in these last 5 minutes, and even potentially the Western Conference. Let's say it's a fully healthy Heat team, or as close to it as you can ask for come playoff time. Who is the team in the Eastern Conference that scares you matchup-wise? And
it's interesting. It's the only Eastern Conference team the Heat has never faced in the playoffs.
Is it Cleveland?
You're there, for God's sakes. It's Cleveland. For all those years, that's all people wanted. When LeBron was there, remember Dwayne and LeBron, their friendship, could they meet in the playoffs? How special that would be before LeBron joined the Heat. Look, I'm not overstating who the Cavaliers are. And I know the Heat, when they've lost these 2 recent games by a lot to the Cavaliers, were shorthanded. But Cleveland's length and athleticism has really been a thorn in the Heat side. That might have been 2 of their worst games of the season. The home loss to Cleveland, and then a week ago last Monday, the loss up there in Cleveland as well. Yes, with Bam, it'll be different, and I get all of that. But look, they've beaten Milwaukee this year. They've beaten Chicago this year. They've beaten Brooklyn this year. They've shown that they have a game that can match up against that level of talent. Cleveland is so far out of left field. 3 7-footers basically in their starting lineup with Jared Allen, with Evan Mobley, and with Larry Markkinen. And like the difference is, JB Bickerstaff says, for years people have said you can't go big in today's NBA anymore. This is what he said, have overlooked, unless your threes can run, unless your threes are gazelles, and his guys can run. they can get back. This is not 3 plodding 7-footers where you're just saying, fine, whatever you do on offense, we're going to beat you back the other end of the court. Those guys can run also. I never would have thought, but when you're asking me about the surprise contender, and I wish I had a ticket in Vegas or somewhere on them, the Cavaliers are a hell of a story. And what they've done against the Heat cannot be understated.
Yeah, and JB Bickerstaff, by the way, and somebody asked about Eric Spoelstra being in Coach of the Year conversation. I want to make sure I get this right. Lenny asking about Coach of the Year conversation. I think it's a great question. I want to get to that in a minute. But Bickerstaff has to be your early runaway for that, and it's because of how bad we thought the Cleveland Cavaliers were going to be.
Yes, we thought them. Remember, I said this on our show on Pallet City Inside the Paint a couple of times. I said you cannot lose to Detroit, you cannot lose to Cleveland, you cannot lose to Orlando. Well, they've lost to all of them except to Orlando. But the difference is the loss to Cleveland don't feel as bad as I thought they would. Because when I'm watching Cleveland, I'm going, holy crap! That Darius Garland's a damn good player.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and Evan Mobley is the rookie of the year, or at least now is the front runner for that also. So I don't feel as bad about the losses to Cleveland. The loss to Detroit, I feel really bad. I love the fact the Heat are playing Detroit again on Thursday. That if you want to make a statement that was a one-off, you run them out of your gym like you did Indiana last night.
Yeah, and by the way, I think they will. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the upcoming games. But I also think, Ira, and this is to your point, it's a styles make fights thing. Right.
Yes.
And those of you that know me know that I'm a Saints fan. The Saints are not better right now than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Right.
But their defense is perfectly built to stop Tom Brady. And you go back to last year and what they did against the Tampa Bay Bucs, except in the playoffs when Jared Cook fumbled the football when they were driving to take a big lead. But anyway, I'm going back and being sad. But the point is that the Saints have a fantastic defensive line. They've got a really good secondary. They've got exactly what you need to attack Tom Brady to where you're not going to have to blitz the guy. The Cleveland Cavaliers have a certain formula, and having these big guys where, as great as PJ Tucker is and has been for the Miami Heat, as great as he was, frankly, against Cleveland, he doesn't have the length. And when you're having to try to slow those guys down on the board, you can only accommodate, you can only compensate for being a shorter big man in so many ways. It's still a
big man's league, as Omar Yurtseven is showing with his rebounding lately.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so if maybe when you play them with a Bam Adebayo, but also a Markieff Morris, you have more bodies to throw out there, and maybe I'm not going to say I'm scared to play Cleveland in the first round.
I agree. That's a statement.
But as far as the teams that I think you can reasonably say the Heat, I think, are better than when they're healthy, that's the team matchup wise, which goes back to the original question.
And I do when we come back from our break now on Pallet Rock City Inside the Paint, want to go at you because I think I disagree a little bit with your take on COVID protocols and where the Miami Heat stand and where Adam Silver has the league going. And I think I got a little bit of a different thought. So I think after this break, when we finally get into that, the ultimate COVID tease, it is something that I want to get to.
So we're up against the break, but to finish the question, Western Conference team in the finals. Which Western Conference team do you think would be?
You know what? I'm not thinking that way. I think that would be sort of, a little bit too haughty and a little bit too arrogant at this point to say what team can the Heat beat in the Western Conference Finals. I know what I've seen against Nikola Jokic and the Nuggets, and I think one they might lose or get very injured, and I still believe there are 2 Jokic brothers out there. So between you and me, I'd rather avoid them because I don't need a street alley fight right there. But you know what? If at any point this season, you and I are seriously talking about who the Heat might face in the NBA Finals in the West, I'm all up for it, but probably not in December.
All right, let's hit your point about COVID protocols and how the NBA is attacking it and how the Heat can counteract this coming up next right here on Inside the Paint. Welcome back. Home stretch right here on Inside the Paint. Make sure to drop your questions and your comments in the chat. You guys really help drive this show.
And this is also the segment when we find out if Clay Ferraro's road internet is better than his home internet because, and actually now I've actually prepared a 2-minute soliloquy. So if you ever disappear from the box over there on the right, that I'm able to cover. But I think that the internet might be better in a cooler weather climate.
So I logged off and logged back on. Typically, for whatever reason, it's when I don't log off in that second break that it goes away in the third. Despite the fact that I called Xfinity and upgraded my internet. But so anyway, Ira, you wanted to disagree with me on the COVID protocols, how the Heat are approaching it, and how the NBA is approaching this.
Clay,
So let's fight. Let's get at it right now.
I actually am going to agree with you, and then just take the point a little further. Because you've heard from other people, and the Heat have been very vigilant about testing their employees. Yesterday, basically the entire building was out getting tested. Bunch of positives came back. They told people, step away from the team. We've seen Jason Jackson be away from the team. There's been another member of the staff away from the team. One of the producers was, unfortunately, television producers left behind in Philadelphia on the last trip. I think he's finally out of, I don't want to say COVID prison, because when you're in the Ritz-Carlton, there are worse places to be.
Well, and let me cut you off real quick to add to that point. My buddy Andy Slater tweeted out yesterday over 20 security staff and FTX arena workers tested positive, and had to be kept home. And it just is. So, look, the Heat are being as vigilant as they can. They're trying to protect their customers, their employees, and their fans as much as they can. But Clay, there's nothing people are doing wrong if we test positive. And I think that needs to be clarified. So when you're saying that the Heat are doing a good job, maybe better than other teams, it happens. There is no badge of shame of testing positive for COVID. There is a badge of shame of not testing for COVID. There's a badge of shame of not protecting your fellow human beings, in not doing whatever you can to make things better. So I do think it's only logical that the Heat will have their COVID moment. Again, the testing yesterday at the arena was for the staffers. The NBA will not begin daily mandatory team testing until the 26th, the day after Christmas. The concern is a lot of people coming from out of town, a lot of players getting on planes, using the 2-day break, mostly unless the teams are playing Christmas, for visiting with family. And I do think just the odds are when the Heat start testing as a team, you will see players falling by the wayside. The irony being, players are coming back from injury. That for all Jimmy has done in fighting this bruised tailbone, for all Bam has done in recovering from his thumb surgery, for all Markieff Morris has done in trying to get past his Nikola Jokic-induced whiplash, they're still just like everyone else out there, you, me, Big O, still vulnerable to a virus that's just airborne right now. So I don't think we should condemn any team because they have 5, 6, 8, 10 players in protocol. It's just the times in the life we're living. The shame of it is, and I use these different words now, I'm not calling it an asterisk season. I'm sick of that. I'm sick of going back to the bubble and what people said about the Heat. But it's a compromise season. The season has been compromised. We're not seeing the best players on a nightly basis. We're not seeing standings as they should shake out based on talent. And therefore, Clay, we are not going to see playoff seedings and matchups based on the logical value of what each team is. So it's a compromise season. But you move forward. And if one day you report on Local 10, I report at the Sun Sentinel, the Heat have 2, 3, 5, 8 players, it's nobody's fault. It's not for lack of trying. I'm not getting political here. You can listen to your other different left, right-wing shows or whatever, but it's just part of it. Some people are doing the best they can, and unfortunately, even the best you can do sometimes isn't enough in this COVID climate. No. So look, let's make the distinction here. I think if you're getting political, you're discussing what should be. We're discussing what is, and this is what is. The league, this schedule, the regular season schedule, is absolutely compromised. I mean, you can't even logically make an argument otherwise.
Right.
I think where I would approach this is what Adam Silver is saying, and I actually kind of fall in line with this, is the regular season schedule is and wins, losses within the regular season. It's less important than let's get to the playoffs and let's hope that everybody is safe and healthy come playoff time. Because Ira, I don't know that it really matters if you've got it. Let's go back to last season, right? I don't care if the Heat had been playing the Bucks and the Heat were the 3 seed or the Bucks were the 6. The Bucks were going to wipe the floor with the Heat last year. The Bucks were just better. They were better built to face them. So I don't think that having the Brooklyn Nets, and right now the number 1 seed, so it doesn't really matter, but let's say they were to drop to the 5 and they ended up playing a team that's the 4 in the first round and have to play there as opposed to playing them in the second round, getting home court advantage. To me, that's not nearly as important as just making sure you get to the. So I think the regular season is compromised, but I think what Adam Silver kind of said yesterday, and I think it's something we've been saying as long as we've been around this league, the regular season and the results in the regular season don't matter nearly as much as they do in, say, the NFL, for example. And the NBA regular season is about moment. It's about what Steph Curry did in New York and how cool that was. It's about who's your scoring leader. It's about who's your all-NBA team. It's about awards. It's not about winning. It's about
unless a quality playoff contender is forced out of the mix. Philadelphia.
Now that's yes.
Joel Embiid had very serious symptoms and missed time. Tobias Harris missed time. I think when you and I were talking about our leading contenders in the East, we didn't know what was going to happen with Ben Simmons. Obviously, there'll be a trade at some point. We love trades. But the Sixers deserve to be in the tournament. Now, the beauty of the current NBA playoff system is this. 20 of 30 teams get a chance. It might be in the playoff round where you have to win consecutive games to play on, but at least you get a chance. So there only are 10 teams that are discarded at the end of the regular season. So the odds of a true contender falling to number 11, well, I mean, I'm not sure New York fans would disagree with this, but you're not in a number 11 team that's going to win a championship anyway. So you didn't get screwed there. Here's my question to you, Clay, and this is premature, especially from the guy who, before the last break here at Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint, said, let's not talk playoffs. Right now, Giannis Antetokounmpo is in protocols. Right now, Trae Young is in protocols. Right now, Kevin Durant is in protocols. We're in the playoffs. We've moved forward. We used our way back forward machine. We're in the postseason. Would you pause the playoffs then if Kevin Durant couldn't play, if Trae Young couldn't play, if Giannis Antetokounmpo couldn't play?
No, and I think we're going to get to the point in the playoffs, and this is just my read on this. I almost think when we get to the playoffs, and look, this is kind of based on where we're at with Omicron and what we think maybe lesser symptoms. This is just guessing, okay? Not an epidemiologist here. But if we get to the point where thankfully the symptoms seem to be less, right? Mm-hmm. Even if you get it, I think come playoff time, you may see the NBA sliding a little bit more towards what the NFL is doing when it comes to testing, which is, look, if you're vaccinated, and by the way, Shams Charania is just reporting the Nets and Blazers postponed, so some breaking news right there. So more Nets games being postponed. But if we get to the playoffs and you're seeing players who are, they're vaccinated, they're boosted, and everybody who gets Omicron is okay, I think you're going to go to less testing, and I think you're going to have more asymptomatic players that just aren't being tested to where
and I agree, that. Especially because, honestly, if you're going to pause for a player, then you'd pause for the 10-day period they're using right now.
Exactly.
And the one thing I think you have to stop is this treadmill of delayed seasons and shortened off seasons. 2 years ago, 2020, yes, the Heat were playing in the NBA Finals in October. Last season, we didn't get to the draft and free agency until August. Then you had the Olympics. Then, boom, you're right back in the season. If you push this again into July and push your summer league and everything, you're in this constant treadmill of trying to catch up with yourself, where hopefully there is an end game where COVID becomes an endemic instead of a pandemic. You manage it like you do flu season and you move forward. So I agree with all that. So it will be compromised to some degree. But I think, Clay, what this is all doing is taking some of the taint away from the Heat being in the 2020 NBA Finals. When people go, oh, no, that was an asterisk season. Life is full of asterisks. Players have missed NBA Finals. I remember covering the Lakers back in the day when Byron Scott got injured before that championship series, and the Lakers had no chance because of their injuries. Remember Isaiah Thomas being injured in that one Finals when he was playing on one leg. It's
Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson a couple years ago.
Yeah, a perfect example there, what happened. Or even Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love before that, when the Cavaliers were injured. Now, I know people look at illness different than injury because injury generally tends to happen as part of the game. Illness happens away from the court, but I think you just have to adjust to all of that. What I tell everyone is this, and you're talking about games that are being canceled, postponed rather. We're going to see that on Christmas Day also. Enjoy what you can when you can, because at the end of the day, this is simply entertainment. And there is no time, I think, maybe other than wartime in our history, when entertainment has been more important. Was last night's Heat Pacers game meaningful in the grand scheme of anything? Probably not even in the seedings. But Clay, it sure as hell was fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that's what this is all about. And by the way, I think more so than ever, it's what the regular season in the NBA is all about. And that's where I go back to what Adam Silver was saying yesterday. It's, he can't find any logical reason to pause the NBA
Right.
season. And I think his actions have backed that up, which is we're going to not just allow teams to go out and sign players that aren't on their current roster to fill spots when guys test positive. We're going to force them to
Right.
do that because we need to play on with these games. And so, Ira, yes, I think there's no difference to me if the Brooklyn Nets are the 1 seed or the 6. There's no difference to me if the Heat finish in the 2 seed or the 5. It's
well, as long as you keep them top 6.
As long as keep them top 6. Or honestly, frankly, if you can't as the 7 seed, and you've got Kevin Durant, James Harden, and maybe Kyrie, if you can't beat the 8 seed, then I don't want to hear it. So it's, and again, that's not being heartless about what the virus. This is about, hey, get there. And as long as you have the group of teams in some form or fashion playing meaningful games after the season, then I think that's all that matters. But as far as right now, it has been really not surprising to me, but I think it's kind of clarified and crystallized the difference between how the NBA views this, how the NFL views this, and how the NHL views this as they shut things down. All right,
and the one difference is the NHL has something none of the other league has. They built in a 2.5-week Olympic break.
Exactly.
If they don't have the Olympic break, they have. I know there's other events, but they have 2.5 weeks to make this all good. That's the equivalent of the NBA last season dealing with cancellations in the first half of the season because they didn't release the schedule for the second half of the season until midseason when they could make it up. This year, we all thought we were pretty much free and clear. They gave us all 82 games. It's a lot harder to schedule back. After the Christmas break, the Heat go out on this hellacious trip. They go to San Antonio, then to Houston, then to Sacramento, then to Golden State, then to Portland, then to Phoenix, then to Atlanta. Oh, my God. And you simply can't send them back to the West Coast late in the season if you're postponing those games. It just doesn't work on the schedule. So the NHL has that built-in advantage. So why is the NHL postponing games? Because they have a 2.5-week swath where they've already said they're not going to Beijing. They're not going to China for the Winter Olympics, so they can do it. That's the difference. And you know what? You still get to see some quality players out there also mixed in, and there's no guarantee when you buy that ticket that a player wasn't going to be injured. No one bought these Heat tickets saying, I'm not going to see Jimmy Butler. I'm not going to see Bam Adebayo. It's sort of a caveat emptor thing. Now it just deals with illness as well.
All right, so let's close this out with what we always do here on Inside the Paint. Let's look at the upcoming schedule. And, you mentioned it earlier. You kind of get a chance for get back against the Detroit Pistons coming up. What do the Heat have to do to change what we saw in Detroit?
Well, they're playing longer defenders against Kyle Lowry, but I think other guys have stepped up. I do think there's a decent chance that Jimmy Butler makes it back. I think he wanted one more game. But I think this could be the game, especially if he was sitting at home watching what happened Sunday in Detroit. So I think that's good for the Heat. I think Caleb Martin, because of protocols and certain heart testing and other things, might not be back until Sunday against Orlando. But if you lose twice in the same week to the Detroit Pistons, you then have to swap out rosters with the Sioux Falls Skyforce and go to the G League instead. I can't fathom that. I don't know what the betting parlay is, but I would imagine the odds on picking Detroit in consecutive games against the Heat, including one at FTX Arena, probably would pay off your mortgage. So I think you take care of that. Again, the schedule's soft now. Then you come back. You have a game against Orlando. You have a light schedule until you go west. You even have San Antonio and Houston, which for what they are, they're coming around. They're not the same. And then Sacramento, because then after that, like I said, you have games where you're going against the Warriors, where you're going against a Blazers team that's desperate, where you're going against Phoenix, who's been world beaters, and 2 against the Hawks. You've got to make hay right now, whether someone's in or whether someone's out, and it has to start. I mean, there's no worse feeling. There could be no worse feeling than going to your 2-day Christmas break off a loss to the Pistons, and I think the Heat realize that.
I thought you were about to say it can be no worse feeling going into your Christmas losing 2 games unless you're in Cleveland, which is where I am right now.
I want to go easy with you, but again,
you'll
help Baker with the laundry, you'll be fine.
The kids got to see snow. It was awesome. It was really cool. No, look, you got to take advantage. You got to take care of business now because, as we've said, you don't know how this thing is going to shake out. And, let's close this by saying, I said, I don't care where these teams finish as long as you get into the playoffs and hopefully top 6, as long as you've got your full rosters come playoff time, that's all that really matters. But the Heat haven't had their outbreak, and hopefully they don't, man. Hopefully
Right.
there's nothing that happens. But, excuse me, when you do, you want to be able to look back on these games and say, we took advantage of a Detroit at home. We took advantage of an Orlando when we could play them, and you were able to get the wins when you did. All right, a lot more Big O show coming up next. Thanks, as always, for hanging out with us right here on Inside the Paint. We'll see you again next week.
Next week.